Recently, not necessarily recently, the international economic crisis has taken its features. Many economic crises took place successively. Every decade included one economic one. So we went in the first one in 2018. That was preceded by many minor crises, including the Russian one and the Latin American one, and the collapse of prices shares in the south of Asia, and the international fiscal one crisis. And what we are witnessing now, after the lockdowns and shutdown made by Corona and the war in Ukraine, all of them made this economic the main story to be heard. It was not only a story made by specialists. In the last century and the century before, there was a condition of surrender in our Arab homeland and most developed countries. It could be the surrender to the international law. Some of the states were specialized in producing the resources, and some were exported products. And this was the gap between the developed and developing countries. The succession of these crises, some researchers think that there are more than 100 crises in 100 years. It was the effect, the influence, impact of the crisis were different. These crises came from following the capital order or system, as Mr. Waddah said in his first session. If we were rich in knowledge and in ideology to the nationalist state, so we can find solutions to these crises. So we are richer in knowledge and culture in terms of the basic principles of the capital system. We try to mention it with all its characteristics to find solutions to overcome the crisis. There are some discussions and hot stories about using the capital like the rate of interest also to solve the solutions. And some criticism I created if X party started, for example, to use. So the rate of interest is largely used in running the crisis. The Turkish management said the rate of interest is not the right way to follow. So the capital order, in my opinion, is the main reason in different parts in creating economic crisis that we are passing through, the old ones and the new ones. So the solutions, I think, cannot come from the capital system. The capital system has a lot of versions and different forms, and the capital order in many phases with the deep crisis. This capital system were different colors to face these crises, but it comes again to its real face. We can say the ugly face of the capital system. This through which we see the debt, international debt, and how it was, and how the wealth is in the hands in a limited number of people on the earth. And so what we can say now, that the last crisis of Corona and the war in Ukraine was only a motivating factor to quicken the speed of the crisis, the existing one. This motivating factor exploded the debt conditions. The debts were before Corona, but they exploded in Corona. Many bad conditions were existed before Corona. Corona came to form for a lift to bring these crises into existence. The war in Ukraine also exploded or made some flowers open early, these bad flowers could be postponed for 50 years, but these crises amid the capital order, we face a new crisis, and we need to get used to new crises in the coming phase. The title of this session, and I don't want to be long, and I look forward to listen to the speakers. We have two main speakers, Rafi Hanif and Tariq Youssef. Then Muhammad Ustai will comment on them. Rami Hanif, and he is the CEO of the bank transactions, and he was the former CEO of the CIMEB, the Islamic one. He was for the Islamic financing. The floor is yours.
It's going to be in English, and you have the translation as well.
It's indeed a privilege to be here today. Since the name of Ibn Battuta was mentioned twice, I wanted to share with you my own journey in the path of Ibn Battuta in Uzbekistan in the last 2 weeks. I was very fortunate to have spent over 2 weeks across Urgench on the eastern side, all the way to Andijan on the western side. I covered 1,500 kilometers across 11 cities. And I want to share with you my own learnings, what I found going back to some of the ancient cities like Bukhara, which has been in existence for 2,500 years, and how those cities still have a lot of lessons for us to learn, to reflect on, and to find solutions for the problems that we are facing today. And I want to cover 3 areas and probably give 3 potential solutions. The first thing I noticed when I went to Samarkand, even Bukhara, the center of the city is always a mosque. So Islam has played a significant role in the advancement of those civilizations 2,500 years ago, 2,000 years ago, and so on. And you just walk into the city, you look for the tallest minaret, the tower. So all these cities had magnificent towers. In fact, if you go to Khiva, they only finished 1/3 of the tower, because the tower was supposed to be so tall that you could see Bukhara from Khiva. That was the project, but never finished because the Emir died before they could complete 1/3 of the tower. And next to it will be a magnificent mosque. And opposite the mosque, you will see madrasas. So Bukhara had 24 madrasas. I think only one is still functioning today. So they had 24 madrasas, 48 mosques, and 4 bazaars. So it's always important to see how the economic system developed. So Islam was the pillar, supported by education institutions, the madrasas. Can you imagine, Bukhara, you can walk in one day, the old city, and they had 24 madrasas. And more than half were waqf. So it was not driven by state alone. The third sector, basically the charity sector, actually contributed to the advancement of learning. And these madrasas, they are not only providing academic education, but also linked to the bazaar. And Professor Muhammad was saying how even in Istanbul, in Eminönü, the new mosque has a bazaar, plus there were madrasas, today no longer functioning. So the madrasas played an important role in providing academic advancement, plus the technical skills called the apprenticeship, the guilds. Prof mentioned about Ahlik, the brotherhood system that created craftsmen. Why they were doing that is because for them trade was really important. So the religion, the madrasas, and the trade. Because as part of the Silk Route, you have to produce. You have to sell more than you consume, so that your economy can advance and you can support the growing population and become a successful city, successful nation. And the fourth one is the financing system. Now that was basically the era of mudarabas and musharakas. Today we no longer practice that. So the cities produce coins. There are 3 types of coins: the copper, the silver, and the gold coins. So every khanat or every emirate had their own coins. And they use gold coins for trade, international trade. Local trades are all done with silver and copper, but international trades are all for gold coins because they need the gold coins so they could buy, they could import. So they sell, they get gold coins, they need to buy from other cities, other countries, they use the same gold coins. So for them, finance was really important. And how do they finance the trade? They do through mudarabas. People will pool their gold dinars, use it to buy the goods, make value add to the goods. So they buy the silk, make it into carpets, make it into they call it the adras or the atlas cloth, and they will sell at a high price, value added. And the financial system at that time was based on profit sharing. So if you collect, if they say there is 1 million coins in circulation, money supply is 1 million. If you do 4 trades, this is what you call the velocity of money. If you do 4 trades a year with 10% margin, you get additional 10% on 1 million. We have 400,000 coins, additional coins from the international trade. So your money supply grows with the number of trades you do. So you need to constantly engage in production and trade so you can get more money coming into your state coffers. And so these are the 4 things I learned: religion, education, trade, and finance, part of the economic system. And if you look at today, where the Muslim states are, if you look at OIC states, where do we stand in education? So I just looked at, while we were talking just now, I looked at the QS ranking for top universities in the world, top 100 universities. Only 1 university came from the Muslim world. From my country, University of Malaya, ranked number 70, 70. None of the other universities, even in Turkey and other places, got into the top 100. Then you look at time education, they have the top 200 universities, not a single university from the Muslim world. Of course, we can say, they are biased and whatnot, but there are universities from Taiwan, from Argentina, from many other countries, developing countries. How come Muslim countries are not able to come? That means there's something fundamentally wrong with our education system. Then we look at the trade, because education we are lagging behind. Then we look at the trade. If you look at the total trade, volume from the Muslim countries and versus the global trade, 57 Islamic countries, comprising of 21% of the world population, only produce 8% of the trade in the world today, 8% only. And if you take the God-given gift to us, natural gas, all the minerals, all free gifts from God, 30% only is coming from manufacturing. That means what we do with our hands and our minds is only 30%. The rest all God-given endowments to us. So again, we are lagging behind. And if you look at the Muslim country trades, what you call the intra-OIC trade, the trade between Muslim countries, is only 18%. That means if Muslim countries are selling 100, only 18 is between Muslim countries you are selling. So intra-OIC trade, the target now is to reach 25% by 2025. That's really, really low. Ideally, it should be 75% trade between Muslim countries. We are not doing that. How can we talk about ummah? How can we talk about commonwealth for the Muslim countries when our share of trade is only 18%? If you go to the European Union's website and look at the history of European Union, in 1958 they started as an economic bloc, with 6 countries coming together to create a commonwealth called European Union. And they were basically trying to build a cooperation based on economic front, trade. Because their logic is, if these 6 countries have a lot of trade, 70% of the trade they do between themselves, they will avoid conflicts. Why would you want to fight with your neighbor who's buying 70% of your products? So they were trying to build economic caucus, economic cooperation, so that it will lead to a political cooperation. So EU was an economic bloc first, then it turned out to be a political bloc. So if you use that test, Muslim countries fail miserably. We only have 18% of the trade between Muslim countries from a very poor share of global trade, 8%. We have 1.3 billion people producing 8% of the world trade. So we are definitely lagging behind. And the last one is the economic system. We still haven't really figured out how the Western economic system is working. I mean, the earlier commentator talked about all the crises. If you look at the time when Ibn Battuta went to Central Asia, the model was based on mudarabas and musharakas. That means if the state has minted 1 million coins, there will only be 1 million coins circulating the system, unless you trade outside. So you get 100,000 coins from Samarkand or from Khiva because you're doing trade. But today, the Western system, because it's developing on fractional reserve banking, if Turkey prints 1 million coins today, the banking system can create 10 million coins tomorrow, because we create based on fractional reserve banking. That means if I collect 1 million coins from you, put in my bank, the banking system only requires me to keep 10% in my reserve. The balance 900,000, I can give it to a loan to Brother Wadda. He then puts in Bank B as a deposit. Bank B keeps 10% from the 900,000, gives to somebody else as a loan. So the money multiplier in any system, whether it's Turkey or Malaysia, if money printed by the central bank is 1 million, and if the reserve requirement is 10%, the economy can produce 10 million worth of new coins, all in the banking system. Not real physical coins, but banking system. So because the money supply has gone up, people will now go out and demand for more goods and services. I want to buy a new car, new TV, new car, new house. So the inflation goes up. When inflation goes up, you have to now try to reduce the money supply. That's when the government comes and said, I need to increase interest rates. So people will find it difficult to borrow. So when the borrowing rate comes down, investment comes down, the market will cool down. There will be less demand for goods and services, and price will come down. So today, inflation is caused by this expansionary monetary policy, where we increase the money supply by reducing the bank reserves. When pandemic happened, most central banks reduced the reserves to zero. If the reserve is zero, what's the money multiplier? Infinite, right? It's infinite. Infinite means you can continue creating with 1 million coins, you can probably create 100 million if you want, which has happened. So you find that Muslims still don't understand the fractional reserve banking and the impact on our economy. So this is the 4 lessons I've learned. The 3 solutions very quickly. 1, we need a blueprint on education. How do we get our universities to be in the top 100? Not only one from Malaysia. How do we create more trade between the intra-ASEAN? Blueprint on trade. Intra-OIC trade has to go to 50%, not 25%. And the third one is, how do we build a more sustainable financial system? So 3 blueprints to basically go back to the glorious days of Ibn Battuta. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا.
Of course, it's a very valuable intervention. I would like to thank you for this, and I believe that you have mentioned and draw the attention to a number of very important issues, and I believe that this was a very good start to talk about the third sector as an important leverage which the Arab and Muslim world have lacked, and the third sector is led by awqaf, by waqf, which most of the Arab countries don't have today. In the past, the Arabs used to, the waqf was what created universities, hospitals, etc. Staying in Turkey, we've seen that the waqf is what is creating this, or having a large role in helping bridge the gaps which the government has when there is a problem with the budget or deficit in the budget of the government. You talked about the financial or the monetary economy today, and that it's false. It's not clear. It's not real. All those dollars in the world is circulated, all less than 20%, or maybe even less than 20% of which is real economy, which is supported by production, by services, which can create life for people, for the nations. That's why we need to move, not to move, actually, to go back to the economy, the real economy. And you have mentioned as well the lack of intra businesses or commerce as an important indicator and between the OIC countries. However, this is important. However, it also shows that the Islamic countries, the Arab countries on top, have a main disease. And all what you've been talking about is the symptom, or are the symptoms, the lack of production, the weak production. We concentrate on only selling the raw material. 30% of our products are made, and the 70% are God-given. So the main disease, the main sickness we have is that the lack of production, the weak production. The question is, how can we improve production and it's going to be spontaneous. We start export, whether to the rest of the Arab world, the Islamic world, or to the rest of the world. In different places. Those are important solutions and important indicators. And I believe we need to end here with saying what you have said at the end was that what is related to when you have listened to this term in the previous also, this hesitancy, this visualization of the hesitancies, talking about the Islamic financing are as if when you present them, you are ashamed. People are ashamed. Why? We have Islamic economy and we have our own formulas where we can finance with. We have what can be called some kind of science. It's not at the beginning of its steps. We went to really far steps in regard to this science. We can be an alternative. We can be basing our work on in regard to solving the solutions to solving the problems of the world. And now I would like to thank you and to move to the paper of the Dr. Tariq Youssef, and he is the head of the Middle East Center for Research, and he was Brookings Doha head, and he was also a non-resident affiliate of Brookings in Washington. The floor is yours. In the name of God, all due thanks to God. Mercy.
A discussion in one language, as my dear friend Rafi had started, and Professor Asotai will continue. I will deliver my remarks in English. I think our dear friend Rafi opened a very big subject on a host of issues that, quite frankly, I did not come prepared to discuss. It also didn't help that our moderator jumped on some of the proposed ideas and took them to another level. But maybe this is part of this healthy debate that we need to have about where we are as far as our positioning as Muslims, as Middle Easterners, and as citizens in a very broader sense. If the suggestion is that the international economic system is going through a very difficult phase and global capitalism is in a crisis, it is hard to disagree with that. You're absolutely right. Capitalism has gone through many of these crises. Crises that came with immense cost, that created other problems in the political and social sphere, and crises that almost disrupted the entire international system at large. But what was also remarkable throughout these crises, and I'm going back 100 years at least, is that the capitalist market system has proven over time to be incredibly resilient, incredibly innovative, incredibly capable of making a comeback, and incredibly capable of also delivering on some very important objectives that we have struggled with in the Muslim world and in the Middle East. Take, for example, poverty reduction, something we all Muslims and all humans can agree on. China's capitalist machinery, market-led economy, together with India, has achieved the biggest reduction of poverty in human history in the last 70 years. We'll have to think about this. We cannot deny it, and we cannot assume that the markets of capitalism and the machinery of these markets had nothing to do with it. Especially when we don't have a readily made alternative to offer, a proven alternative. an alternative that in fact can achieve real objectives. We can differentiate between financial capitalism and markets, and I think we should. And I'm all for needing to deal with the problems of finance and banking, and especially debt, and what it does to countries, and what it will do in the next few years to a number of countries in the Muslim world. We have some highly indebted countries that could very well be pushed into severe economic crisis because of debt and markets and banking. But markets, by and large, capitalism in a very genuine, benign sense, should not also be thrown out of the window. Why do I say this? And I'm going to try now to relate what I'm about to say to the initial discussion in the first panel. One of the areas that people are debating, economists and observers around the world at the moment, is the following question. As the international system becomes more multipolar, as tensions between China and the US escalate, as some of you suggested in the initial panel, we could very well see the emergence of a new set of global arrangements. What happens to the international economic system? What happens to globalization? There is every reason to believe that, in fact, whatever happens in the international political system, it will have implications, very serious implications, very consequential implications for globalization, for the integration of the world economy, and maybe for capitalism. And I think this is where maybe our thinking, building on the first panel, should be advancing right now. So let us suppose there is, in fact, a Cold War between China and the US. There is now, and by the way, these are not my words, these are the words of people who are on both sides observing or participating in this escalating tension. Maybe we are on the verge of a new Cold War. What will be the implications of it for our countries and for the world? Will it be like the previous Cold War, post-World War II? Will it be different in other ways? I think it will be different in some ways, but it will be the same. And economically, it would be important for us to try to tease out some of the implications. Unlike the first Cold War, for example, where it was a rivalry between two nations at a strategic level, nuclear, military, geopolitical influence. This time around, China is in fact not just a strategic rival potentially, but an economic rival. China is an economic contender with an economic vision, with an economic model. And I would say an economic model that is very attractive for a lot of countries in our region. I am old enough to remember traveling around the Middle East when the US was promoting democracy and promoting good governance and transparency, hearing our government officials, Muslim government officials saying, we do not want your democracy or good governance. We want China's economic model because it seems to be delivering. This will make the kind of Cold War a very different one. Because many countries in our region will want to do both. Bargain on security, bargain on technology, bargain on military affairs, but they also want to do bargaining on economic issues, and they have more room now. Countries in the Muslim world will not have to choose one camp or the other. They will have plenty of room to bargain between both sides. But it will be different bargaining arrangements that will likely, over time, become clear. And there will be ones that unfortunately will benefit not all countries in the Middle East or in the Muslim world. Let me maybe try to explain this a bit more. If we're on the verge of a Cold War with economic tools and economic bargains and economic arrangements being on the table, then whether it's China or the US, they will be choosing allies and allocating privileges and access on the basis of what countries can give them in return. Unfortunately, and this is where I agree completely with Brother Rafi, not all of our countries are in a position to participate and benefit. Your geography will matter. Your national capabilities will matter. Your ability to use technology will matter. Your industrial base will matter. Your size will also matter in this. It is not an accident that the focus recently has been on the large developing countries. The BRICS, for example. Who's going to court the BRICS to their side? The Indias of the world, the Mexicos of the world, the Turkeys of the world, the Indonesias of the world. But many other Middle Eastern and Muslim countries will be left out of this. The kind of globalization that will emerge as a result, and it has already started, is a different globalization from the one we've seen in the last 20, 30 years. It will be much more selective, much more targeted, and much more driven by these national security Cold War considerations. Who can I trust to secure the supply chain? Who can I trust to protect my technology? Who can I trust to be my ally if there are points of pressure and regional conflicts? The worst potential consequence coming out of this notion of geopolitical competition, led at the heart of it by China and the US, is that many of the benefits of globalization, which I think Muslim countries, Middle Eastern countries should have benefited from the past, will no longer be available. Trade will probably be on the decline, the trade as we knew it before. Investment flows could very well decrease. Access to markets will not be granted to everyone. The impact of these on things like poverty reduction, equality, education, transfer of technology will diminish. What I'm trying to say is, based again, starting with the initial discussion we had in the first panel, if we're moving in a world where things will be reconfigured geopolitically, then they will also be reconfigured economically, which will make the job of our region much more difficult. And it's not clear at that moment you can talk about one region. We are no longer one Muslim world or one Middle East. The forces of divergence within our world are far stronger and more powerful than the forces of convergence and cooperation and integration. One example. One neighborhood that I live in right now is the Gulf, the GCC countries. One of the achievements of the GCC in the last 25 years is that they created the most dynamic regional trading bloc relative to the rest of the Middle East. The most dynamic regional cooperative organization. But it's increasingly looking like the GCC, as we knew it before, is a thing of the past. More and more, within the GCC, countries are competing with one another instead of cooperating, instead of integrating. That gives you a sense of where we're heading as a region. I think it's premature, and I'll stop here because I've exhausted my 10 minutes, to start reacting to these changes with ready-made prescriptions. And I agree with the voices from the earlier session that warned us against bringing back from history old formulas or old visions we imagined and trying to impose them on what is likely to happen in the coming period. We need a fresh start at every level. Ideas, voices, personalities. I think we need a fresh start. Why do I say this? And forgive me for being very blunt in the last thing I was about to say. This was meant to be an event about al-islah wa al-taghyir, reform and change. I've spent 20 years of my life studying and documenting examples, periods, episodes, attempts at reform and change within existing systems in many Arab countries. So forget politics, forget ideology, fixing the public sector, fixing institutions. The problem I have come to realize after 20 years, and I would say this as one of the biggest conclusions coming out of this work, is it was never a problem of a lack of ideas or a lack of vision. The problem from the start and until the end was always a problem about implementation. So if you're going to be introducing new ideas about how to fix the Ummah or the Middle East or even a small neighborhood, your ideas better have in them not just the vision, but the steps of how you plan to go about doing it. That's the deciding factor between failure and success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tariq. Thank you very much. We need to move immediately to save time. Dr. Muhammad Ostim, he is the professor of Islamic economy in the Durham University for the Acts, and for his researches focus and papers on the moral economy and Islamic economy and the governance, and he is member of the International Society of the Islamic Jurisprudence. The floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. It is rather challenging when Rafi started, of course, an embedded moral economy nature of the Muslim history, then moving to the contemporary challenges that we have. But I think the answer lies somewhere in between, in the sense that, therefore, my reference to moral economy, the new imaginaries, one way or another, is essential now, as stated by Tariq as well. But that new imaginary, the Islah, the reform, whether we are to Islah, the existing economic system that has been imposed on us in the Muslim world, but in the rest of the world, or we are to start something fresh, something new. Of course, it is very fearful, the idea of starting something entirely new. But at the same time, after trying in the last 100 years several times in different forms, it is very much clear that the existing capitalist system, despite the fact that it might have reduced poverty in India, but it hasn't delivered. It hasn't delivered in terms of providing people with the excesses. Of course, in order to provide that, therefore, the emergence of the welfare state aimed at the resilience that we are talking is not an integrated resilience of capitalism, but the blending system capitalism has created, perhaps the blending nature that we have to talk rather than the resilience. It has always found out the opportunities from other spaces, and therefore easily blended and redefined itself to be relevant. But each time, strangely enough, I'm sure that after the global financial crisis, some of you at least might have seen that 800 years of crisis. In other words, crisis is not only 2008 or COVID, but the crisis of this economic system that we are talking, and I would disagree, unfortunately, with Tariq on the market system being different than the financialized economy, because it is the financialized economy is the product of that market system. So therefore, the continuous nature of this crisis is something. Of course, I'm not saying that the Muslim history was immune of any crisis. No, of course, crisis, nature through which we develop. But the current crisis that we have around us, in particular, since the neoliberal policy is imposed on the rest of the world with the slogan of the end of history, that is the major problem we have. Because the history, of course, is a product of blending. You go to Istanbul, the Galata Tower, Venetians were operating from Istanbul more than 1,000 years ago. You go to Venice, you see the Ottoman trading building, and hence the blending nature of history. But since 1917, the imposition of a particular global order on the rest of the world, entire completion of the modernist discourse of homogeneous societies, that is the challenge we have now. Because even if you go to any village in the remote areas of any country now in the world, you will see the same practices as it is in the capitalist centers of the world. And the fear that we have to develop out of that, and which again in the first session, the discussion on the nation state is and was product of capitalism. In order for capitalism to be able to survive, it has to make into the pieces. The larger pieces has to be into the smaller pieces. From the empires to nation states, from nation states to unitary family, from unitary families now we have individuals. So that process through which capitalism has survived in order to create demand. Let's look at the number of flats now in Istanbul available, just the studio flats, as opposed to the family lives that we are talking. And this is happening, strange enough, not only in Istanbul, of course, in Muslim geographies all over the world, where mostly the so-called Islamic ideals are promoted by the governments in each of these countries. What kind of Islamic ideals that we are talking now? When we are shifting this individualization, entire individualization and creating. And that brings us the whole definition of capitalism, creation of this individual at the core of the problem. Rafi mentioned about this amazing embedded history of the Muslims, including the Istanbul. You go around, I wish we have time to tell you the economic history that exists here. The way the mosque, the madrasa, and the pazar was linked, creating that embedded quality of life. And then you're talking now Istanbul being the center of one-bed flats or the studio flats, the shift. And this is not an innocent shift, an important lesson for us, however, here, how Islamic activism, Islamic civil society has become, in a subaltern manner, an instrument for that. And that's something that I really want to focus on, because yes, capitalism is there, it has been working. However, with the hope that neoliberalism will provide opportunity space for the Islamic existence, how Islamic civil society and Islamic groups jumped on the wagon of neoliberalism without questioning what the end result of that would be, without looking at the trajectory of development of capitalism, what it has produced. To understand that, how that failure is remarkable for us, is an important lesson that we have to draw in order to be able to create the new imaginaries that an embedded society that we are talking. Therefore, the debt issue, for instance, I'm jumping issues, but time, the debt issue, for instance, I always give this example. In 2000 and 2001, Turkey went through an amazing, unfortunate financial and currency crisis. Around 30 banks failed totally. And all those people working in those banks and financial institutions could easily go and live with their parents in their homes. And today, may Allah protect, if same thing happens, that would not be possible because the fathers of those people now working in the banks, my generation, are crazily indebted as well. In 2000, household debt in this country was 2% of the GDP. Now we are talking, the Malaysian figure is 93%, and Turkish figure is not better than that. In other words, if that happens, that embeddedness that you are referring, it collapsed. And this is an important lesson if we are to create an imaginary within that discourse, civilizational discourse that we have referred to. That individualization, this debt creation process, the financial inclusion, we are told that is a fantastic thing, that the Indian microfinance is rescuing people. No, it's not rescuing. Is creating indebted man and woman. And indebted man and woman is hegemonically dominated man and woman. And that's the reality. If you are going to get the villager to have a bank card or the credit card, that person now in a lifetime entirely becomes a slave of the system. And therefore, interestingly, Islamic finance in Malaysia in 1960s responds to the development of Bumiputras, people of the land, to develop them. But Bumiputra cleverly still has not engagement with Islamic finance other than the Kuala Lumpur, because they have understood that this link, the financial link, unfortunately shifts the hegemony, whether we call it the Tafidi hegemony from the acceptance of the Allah's hegemony to the financial system. It's not an innocent thing, it is deep. So this behavioral part is an important issue before moving to closely to the macro part. But of course this individualization process, because it directly relates to the creation of nation state. Nation state is a response to the capital development of capitalism. And the way it has developed, unfortunately, as was mentioned in the first session, the world is moving away, capitalist world moving away from nation state, but in the Muslim world, this tight control of the nation state, the borders, okay? Until the Syrian crisis, unfortunately, how many people in Turkey just stepped down in Damascus, enjoyed the Damascusian environment? No, that has not happened. The capitalist form of this nation state is something that we have to be concerned. But importantly also, an amazing lesson in the COVID period, why capitalist assumptions are not working is important for us. Capitalist assumptions will tell individualization, individual rational, individual self-maximization. But when COVID happened, if I want to keep healthy, I have to ensure that Rafi is healthy. Because if I hang around with him and if he's not healthy, I will be contaminated as well. The entire assumption collapsed, but still no one wants to see that. If I am self-maximizing, I shouldn't give a damn about Rafi's health. But I have to survive, and therefore I need Rafi to be healthy as well. As you can see, the paradigm shift is essential for us to move on to that embedded system that Rafi mentioned in the beginning. It's not a historical reality, it is happening. It is just we are very much obsessed with the nation state's project and trying to find solution for that nation state. But in the peripheries, in the streets of every country, there are real people. And our objective, therefore, has to be well-being of the individuals on the street, the humans, are not methodological individual, but the humans on the street, rather than this macro entity that we have given some attachment, some sacrosanctity. No, that's not the case. Our objective, Islamically, is to ensure justice for what? For humans and all the stakeholders. That includes environment, that includes climate, that includes land. So how we can therefore, in our new imaginary, create this rescuing process, the healing process. Capitalism is not going to bring us the healing process. And therefore we have to create this new imaginary by redefining the concept and initiating the institutions. Waqf indeed is an amazing institution, but in the current Islamic financial world, unfortunately, Waqf is financialized. And also the terms have changed. Now we are citizens. We are not subjects of the old times when the Waqf was delivering. Now we are paying tax. We are citizens. And state failing to deliver. On top of that, state now taking over and manipulating the Waqf system as well on top of that. The total social failure, therefore we have the social welfare laws. And therefore these new definitions are essential for us to consider, because this Islah is important, is essential, is an essential criteria in the Islamic moral economy. However, where we are starting to Islah, to reform, that's an important point, because change is inevitable. Change has to happen. That's the nature that Islam is promoting as well. Therefore, we have to create this new imaginary, and is in a becoming process to see how that evolves in terms of delivering. And therefore, when we look at this linear growth that imposed on the world, not only Muslim world, but all over the world with capitalism. Now we are talking about sustainability, SDGs and all that. But your growth model does not recognize any of those stakeholders. Your equation, the initial equation, your production function, your consumption function does not recognize. In my consumption function, I do not consider Rafi's health. And therefore, I can easily be contaminated in the process. Those definitions have to change so that we can bring out the substantive Islamic morality. To bring those definitions is important. Environmental problem, we are talking climate, yet the capitalist production function does not recognize. So what it becomes, let's continue as it is, but what we do, well, just additional layers to correct the process. And Rafi is the best person to explain how that process worked, to be honest. And so that's the reality. So rather than going through that processes each time, with a correction mechanism, how we can deal with it. I'm sorry, I put my phone to ring, but it hasn't finished my time. Okay, sorry, it hasn't. I was hoping my phone will respond, but I think it's failing me. But just to finish that, and therefore this linear growth is an important paradigm that we have to give way, consider, such as the growth, such as considering the stakeholder, extended stakeholder governance model, so that accessibility to resources can be possible. The main problem we have around us, accessibility to resources. And Islamically, our understanding was that Allah created all the resources for everyone to have equal access, and how that equity-based system therefore can be generated. Again, it tells us that you cannot sell, you cannot commodify certain things, the fire, the air, and the water, but everything is commodity. This water is commodity here for us, and these are important factors for us. And how in our small world, how we can overcome this by starting with, before going to the macro dynamics of solving, for instance, how we should not leave the waters here, just having one slip and leaving that, of course, considering the environmental impact of that plastic as well. So it has to start at home, and slowly challenging this financialization and the linear growth and commodification process, so that the resource accessibilities can be possible for a better future. My apologies for overrunning my time, but I was hoping my phone will tell me.
شكرا جزيلا دكتور أستاذ. شكرا جزيلا دكتور على
Thank you very much, Doctor, for your insight.